All right, here we are. I hope you can hear me. Make sure my mic is on. Everything is good. All right, excellent. Well, today, since it is our first official, I guess, Facebook Live and YouTube Live in January of 2026, I thought one of the things we would do is talk about workplace bullying, what can you really do to stop it, and how stop bully culture can support you in that endeavor of trying to get workplace bullying to stop. Okay, first off, I want to give you a couple of updates about stop bully culture. Our podcast, Exposing Workplace Bullying, dropped the first episode of season 3 yesterday, and season 3 is the profile of a workplace bully, and we're talking about workplace bullies throughout the whole season. And we're talking about it from a little bit different perspective. We're talking about who the workplace bully is. Is there a type of person who becomes a workplace bully? And then we're going to really dig into bullying from the perspective of a bully. And also, just like with every other season, we're going to talk about what does that mean if you're the person being bullied. So that's pretty cool. And so that will be, the next 8 weeks we'll be talking about the workplace bully. Some of the lives are going to be integrated into that same vein, talking about workplace bullies. The reality is we don't give enough airtime to the workplace bully. We often use the umbrella of workplace bullying to talk about what's wrong with victims and what they can do to stop it. So first off, workplace bullying is a complicated issue. If you do a Google search or if you look up any definition, it's basically just a glorified version of interpersonal conflict, and it goes a little bit something like this. Workplace bullying is, you have people in your work environment who have quote unquote targeted another person in the work environment, and they engage in bullying behaviors, which of course fall under the categories of verbal, so yelling, screaming, nonverbal, clenching a fist, eye rolls, those sorts of things. Whatever you can do with your body in a nonverbal way, that's nonverbal bullying. Emotional things like gaslighting, the trauma of rumors and all of those, that kind of thing is emotional. Again, as far as I'm concerned, every form or type of abuse has an emotional cost and an emotional payoff for the bully. So everything has a connection to emotional abuse. Then also there's physical abuse in the workplace. That can be having your boss stand in front of your door so you can't get out. In my case, there's a lot of physical intimidation, a lot of physical violence. I know my colleagues had stuff thrown at them. They were blocked into the door damn near every week. I had, and then my colleague and myself, we had a colleague come around the table at us, charging around the table. And, one of the things when it comes to physical violence, we often think that doesn't happen. But it happens at much higher rates than we give credit to it. And so it's and there is something different about somebody clenching their fist, right, in a nonverbal fashion when I'm talking in a meeting versus somebody physically blocking me and not letting me go out the door, right, blocking my mechanism to get out. And so there's something about that physical violence that it impedes on your personal safety in a way some of those other things, like yelling, doesn't. Okay, so we have, and also then we have cyber. So we have cyberbullying, physical, nonverbal, verbal, and emotional. And sometimes, I think when we think about those things happening, we think about, oh, Jan gets an email or Jan gets yelled at. But sometimes those things are happening multiple times a day by multiple people. So it isn't like I'm coming into the office and I get yelled at. It's that I'm coming into the office, people are turning around so they don't have to have contact with me. Then I go to my office and I open up my email, and there's a ton, an email chain of my bully and then bystanders jumping in telling me what a terrible person I am, and et cetera, et cetera. So these things are not just, one-offs. They're happening frequently, daily, multiple times a day, lots of times, and most often happening by your bully and also when bystanders cross the line. And so, and there's a cost to the person who's being bullied. It causes harm both personally and professionally. Now, if we go back to the definition, what I just talked about is essentially it. And it doesn't even go into that much detail. Most definitions that I've read don't even say cyberbullying, they don't say the types of abuse, okay? There's no time frame, doesn't have to happen. There's no time frame that says it has to start here. It starts day one, or it starts, at some point, and then 30 days, that's when it becomes bullying. There's no time frame attached. As a general rule, I generally say three months, right? Because if it's, a month or two, it could just be I'm your boss and I've had a very hard personal life or something like that. It has to be something that has gone on for a period of time. Now, again, there's no agreed upon time, and most definitions don't have a time frame in there, okay? Now, according to, ChatGPT, because I asked, because oftentimes 3 months will come up, what ChatGPT said was that 3 months is often a kind of a time frame that HR uses for something to be considered a problem. So I don't know. Again, but the key is it has to be happening to you at work and affecting you at work and home. And it's happening, it's not a one-off. I didn't just get yelled at. It's not a two-off. It's not necessarily a pattern, but it's happening over time, and it often is like and mimics a pattern, okay? That's essentially where most definitions when it comes to workplace bullying stop, okay? That's a simplistic definition, and it doesn't really even cover all of the things that it should be covering if you're considering just the impact on the person. So I have added in my own personal definition that I have created, I have added an approximate time. I've also added the categories of bullying, and am saying that the reason that the person is doing it, okay, is with the intent to cause harm. Most definitions don't say that. They say, again, you have somebody in your workplace who quote unquote targets you. I don't use that verbiage. I don't like it. I find it offensive to me personally. And because what it should be saying is that you have somebody in your workplace who is abusive, who is abusing the colleague, not targeting. Those things are different, okay? So that basic definition I gave you is just simplistic. It barely touches the surface. I have added, because really workplace bullying is not just, what I just described is essentially interpersonal conflict. Okay, on steroids, yes. But what also has to happen in workplace bullying is, because it's a systematic problem, because if it was just somebody was coming after you and this was the category of things they were doing to you and it caused you personal and professional harm, generally what should happen is you should be able to either go to that person and say, hey, you know what, Bob, these things are really bothering me, and I'd really like it if you'd stop yelling at me in the hallway, or whatever it is, right? You would go to the person, you try to work it out, and generally, as a rule, sometimes those things stop. If they don't, then you take it to the next level. And generally, HR or your supervisor would intervene and say, hey, we can't have yelling in the workplace. What makes bullying different is what's happening behind the scenes, what makes it a systematic problem. Okay, so to become bullying, it also has to embed itself into the culture. People have to think and see you a different way because they develop over time my side bias, right? So bystanders, again, most people say, oh, bystanders are neutral. No, they're not. They're part of the problem. They're included in the definition, dysfunctional group dynamics. Because what happens over time is because your bully is manipulating the culture and people in the organization, bystanders realize that your bully has a lot of power and they go along to get along. Because we have this idea that bystanders or adults in the workplace who see something that's wrong happening will stand up and do something. Okay? I would like you to give me 10 examples of that actually happening, because I can't even think of one time other than myself when I was in the workplace that somebody saw something. It didn't even have to be bullying with me. Saw something wrong and tried to make a change. Zero. Right? Because people in the workplace don't do those things because we're not trained to be the whistleblower. Most people can't go against the crowd because our need for belonging in a group is so strong. And it's the same thing in the workplace. So let's recap. So we have our basic definition, right? So it's this set of behaviors that your bully or bullies, because you can have more than one, is using to abuse and harm you. And there is dysfunctional and flawed group dynamics that allow for people to have bias about you, and that they cover for the bully, right? So there's groupthink, there's peer pressure to stay in line, there's my side bias where they've listened to the narrative that your bully has said about you and then they believe it. Okay, and so and HR is not immune from experiencing my side bias. Okay, because a lot of times what happens is you're working, your bully and bystanders are pipelining back to HR to tell them what a terrible person you are. So by the time you go to report, okay, HR thinks you're a problem and they're not going to listen to you. Okay, in fact, you might be the one getting disciplined when you go and make the report, or getting fired. Okay, that says right there, okay, the fact that HR won't get involved or intervene means that the culture is dysfunctional. Okay, the other thing that has to happen is, again, this idea that the organization does nothing and they allow those things to happen. And that's how bullying happens, right? It's the set of behaviors, but it's also this second piece where the organizational culture is totally dysfunctional. And that's why the interventions, again, that most people tell you to do, document, report, or best case scenario is you leave, are not your only choices. Okay? Because when you yes, you should be documenting. I'm a huge fan of documenting. But documenting and reporting, okay, first off, there's a way to document to cover yourself, to make sure you're getting everything down in written form, okay? And if you're interested in learning how to document, I have a lot of resources on my shop to do that. In fact, I have an Excel and Google sheet that you can just download and fill in with everything you need to, again, It's excellent if you want to make a case, but it's also excellent to protect your reputation and your credibility. Okay? But there's a way to do it, and there's a wrong way to do it. And when you report, same thing. Reporting doesn't mean anything. How do I do it? Is there a good time when I should report? What evidence for my documentation do I need to bring in? Do I need to have a support person? What are the consequences of reporting? Because it almost always blows up in your face if you don't do it in a certain, in a particular fashion that shows what's happening, versus what most people do is something crappy happens yesterday and then they go in and report that. That isn't bullying. That's one bad behavior. You have to show your evidence of the 500 times that same kind of thing has happened to you. So there's a way to do it and to increase the likelihood that someone will take action. And the most important is to protect yourself. Okay? So if you're the person being bullied, okay, there are a lot of things you can do other than document, report, and leave. Okay, now I think for your documentation, everybody who's being bullied should do that to the best of your ability. Because I also know that if you're working a job, which all of you are, and you're experiencing that abuse, coming home or even documenting while you're at work is a painful experience. And sometimes you might just say, you know what, I'm not documenting next week. Okay, that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Just make a note. Too difficult this week. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, because you're working in an abusive environment, you got to give yourself a break. And nobody is saying that when you're documenting, you have to document for perfection. You're documenting as the best you can in an abusive workplace. Okay? That's totally different. Do the best you can. That's all you can do. But what else can you do if you're the person being bullied? Okay? Now, this is where I expect people to use their documentation to strategize, to figure out when they're most vulnerable for bullying, and then to figure out effective ways to deal with your bully in those moments. Okay, and here's the other bad thing about bullying. It doesn't always happen in the same way. And this is important for you, is that the more you strategize around shutting down your bully and minimizing your abuse and your vulnerability to what they're doing to you, the more they will change their bullying to try to get you. Okay? What do I mean by that? Let me tell you. So, for example, if your bully, I always use Bob the bully. If Bob is bullying you in meetings and he interrupts, or, he yells at you, and you've developed a strategy that if he interrupts, you just stop talking and you look at him making eye contact, okay? And you don't say anything, okay, until he stops talking. And if he doesn't stop talking, you just keep looking at him, okay? Again, just a strategy I'm throwing out, not necessarily one I might use, okay? And so then Bob, when he sees that, he's going to realize that you're doing something different, because previously when you did that, you said, oh, Bob, stop. Stop interrupting me, Bob. Bob, I need to get this done, right? You became defensive and you were telling him to stop, okay? But when you have a more neutral strategy like silent, and you just look at him, okay, he is going to respond to that, because he's not getting the emotional reaction that fuels his bullying. So then he might switch to something else, or he might have somebody else do something. So maybe he stops interrupting, but then Betty starts doing it, okay? So you have to have more than one strategy. And when you strategize and change how you deal with them, you can expect that the bullying might change. Okay? So you can develop strategies using your documentation. This is where I like to use documentation. Yes, you can use it for reporting, but you don't have to. But you can document for a couple of weeks and figure out when you're vulnerable, right? Where are you bullied the most? Okay, because I think a lot of times we don't think about those things. We don't think about where am I being bullied, okay, the most? What type of bullying is it? And, which is key to strategy, is what am I doing to minimize the harm, okay? Because if you're the individual and person being bullied, the likelihood that you can stop it on your own is none. Okay, almost none. Not impossible, but almost none. Okay, because of all these other things happening behind the scenes, the cultural changes, the dysfunction in the group dynamics. You can't control that. You can only control yourself. And the other thing that's good about these strategies is lots of times when you're the person being bullied, like for myself and for the other people that were bullied around me, they got obsessed with getting it to stop and focusing on the bully, and they didn't focus on themselves. And the problem with that is you can't control them. You can't control HR. Okay, you can make the report and then it's out of your hands. And so focusing on your strategy does two things. One, it reminds you, you know what? Yeah, maybe I'm the lowest person, on the ladder or the chain of command, but I have a lot of power in controlling how I respond to my bullying and Bob, which means I can reduce the harm and I can actually use strategies that throws the bully off the rocker and pulls the rug out from underneath them. That is empowering. And when you focus on yourself, you realize you have a lot more power, and also you're taking care of yourself. Okay? You're taking care of yourself. But what about, let's talk about again. Oh, let me just say this one thing. So, what I do at Stop Bully Culture is I work with people who are bullied to help them strategize and set goals as to what they want to do in their workplace, right? The first thing we always do is figure out, again, those times you're most vulnerable, when is it happening, and how are you responding, and what can be changed. All up to you, not me. We start where you're at. We work with where you want to go. It is not about Jan thinks you should leave. Jan thinks you should document. If you don't want to document, you don't have to document. We work together to help you better deal with workplace bullying. Okay? Okay. Now, what if you're in HR or you're a leader, right? Those are the situations and the positions that have some authority. Now, HR, I just want to say this, two things. First off, they can't stop the bullying either, okay? They might create policy, but they don't create policy unless the board or their boss says, hey, HR, we'd like a policy, an anti-bullying policy. That's not what they do. Okay, they create policy that the boss wants to protect their boss. See the problem? The other thing is HR, in a culture where there's bullying, often has multiple bullies, right? So why would they want to help you stop bullying when they're getting bullied, right? I get that. I do. But there are things, HR, if you're out there and you're listening, there are lots of things you can do. You should be telling people what to document and how to document. Now, I know you're probably not going to do that because you don't want them to bring in documentation that shows clear evidence that your boss is a bully, because then you're in a very, vicarious spot. I get that. But you can help people respond better to bullying, reducing their vulnerability. How are they responding? Are they getting defensive? That is 100% an don't do. Do we do it? Sure, right? It's normal, right? Somebody tells us we're not doing our job, we want to defend ourselves and say, yeah, you know what? I did do it. But it's a mistake across the board. If you're doing that now, try to do something else. So you can help people use microscripts. I see. Okay, Bob. Interesting. All of those are responses to replace defensiveness. You can help people do that. Okay? You can say to the person who's bullying, you ain't doing that. And if you do it, here's the consequence. You do have some power to do that. Okay? You can also train bystanders, again, not to go along to get along, but what can they actually do? And do not teach them how to speak up, because I promise you, they don't know how to do that. You can teach them how to be a peer mentor. You can teach them how to be a support person that can be private, where the person who's the person who's doing the bullying never knows that bystander is supporting the person they're bullying, right? You can teach those skills that actually help increase and improve the group dynamic and reduce bullying, because bystanders are your key people to get bullying to stop, because they're the ones who are keeping their mouths shut. They're the ones who are lying and telling you that I'm the problem. So if you get a report from 5, 6, 7 people, the majority of people in a department, and they're all bitching about one person, okay, it's the other 10, 9, or 8 that you should be looking at, not the one. Get out of your office and start looking and watching and observing what people are doing. Okay, because they do something other than, turn away or increase the trauma for the person who's being bullied. Okay, do something different. And HR, I have resources on my website. I have an HR checklist that says, are you doing this? No? Well, maybe you should be doing this. It tells you exactly what you need to do when things happen around workplace bullying. And I guarantee you, you're not doing it. And this is not brain surgery. I'm sorry, it's not. These are easy, not necessarily easy, but they're not that difficult. They're strategies and ways that you can implement even for yourself personally to help this culture in your organization improve. So, if you really want to stop bullying, these things have to happen. You need to help the person who's being bullied. Help them manage and deal with it. Okay? And you need to help change the organizational culture. That means bystanders need to know what to do. Again, I just mentioned they don't know what to do. We have this idea, again, as I mentioned earlier, is that somehow we think that speak up, people know how to do that. If you want bystanders to speak up, you have to teach them the words to say how and when. Because if you don't teach them those skills, trust me, they don't have them. Because those are not innate skills, those are skills we learn. You have to start weeding out the bullying by replacing normalized bullying behavior with better behavior. You can do that simply by having professional behavior standards. Or if you don't want to have a blanket policy, start with where people are being bullied the most. Try an email policy or a Slack or Teams policy so that you can stop and prevent cyberbullying. Okay, at least in academics, cyberbullying is top on the list. Why? Because nobody shows up in person anymore. Everybody's working in their office and they don't connect. And so you have people who are bullies spending a lot of time writing 20, 30-page emails, which are mostly engaging in bullying that make no sense. So have an email policy, have a Slack and Teams or whatever your platform is, so that you can stop those things. And then when you put a policy in place, Bob's going to push back as hard as he can because he's been getting away with stuff. And when you draw the line in the sand, Bob's going to cross it. Bob's going to cross it because he's had no accountability. So you have to have accountability. And you better be willing to drop the hammer when you put consequences in place. So for example, just like when I was raising my kids, if I said, like one time, I said to Ethan, if you don't clean your room tomorrow, I'm taking the, modem with me. Okay? And then of course, did he clean his room? No. So what did I do? I had to take the modem with me. You have to follow through when you put consequences in. Treat them like kids. That's what they're acting like. No, they're worse than kids because they're adults who are abusing each other. That's the problem. Again, if you have any questions, let me know, because I do a 20-minute strategy call that's free, where if you have a major problem or something that's really concerning you, everybody gets a free call, and there's no pressure for anything. Okay, I highly recommend that if you're in HR, you're a leader, you're a bystander, you're the person being bullied, take advantage of that. The second thing is go to my shop. I have a lot of resources that are reasonably priced for all of these things, for leaders, for HR, for the person who's being bullied. There are all sorts of things that you can do to help make your workplace better. And can we stop it? Hell yes, we can stop it. We can, but you can't expect the person who's being abused to stop a problem that is embedded into the entire organizational culture. It just won't happen. But, so it takes this complex, systematic, it's time to log off. It takes a complex, systematic interventions at the micro, meso, and macro level. That's what it takes. That's systematic intervention. All right. Well, make sure you go to Exposing Workplace Bullying and listen to that first episode. The next episode, we're really going to be digging in on who bullies are. And I'm going to be myth busting some of those myths we have about who bullies. So make sure you go there. Again, thank you so much. Please like and follow. I really appreciate you. And if there's anything you need, just message me. And so thank you so much. I appreciate all of you.